This is the Future of Finance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Finance podcast. I'm George Dyer, and I'm really excited about today's episode. We have a couple of the key leaders from ImpactPHL on the show. Cory Donovan, who is the co-founder and currently Senior VP for Community Engagement, and Kafi Lindsay, who is the Executive Director. ImpactPHL is a nonprofit that provides education and networking on impact investing in the greater Philadelphia region. As you'll hear in our conversation, they host events, they build awareness around impact investing opportunities, and generally build the community and ecosystem of impact investing in the city and the region. Cory and Kafi are both lovely people. It was a pleasure talking to them, and really exciting to see how they are putting this local lens on impact investing and how that can make such a difference in communities. We also talk about a lot of the big picture issues and themes that tend to come up a lot on this podcast, like how to deal and think about externalities that harm communities and the environment, and how to implement system-level investing strategies, as well as things like how the concept of fiduciary duty is evolving in light of 21st century challenges, and a lot more. So I hope you enjoy it. Please follow the podcast if you haven't already. And here is Kafi and Cory from ImpactPHL. Cory, Kafi, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. How are you both doing today?
Doing very well. Thank you for having us. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited to share more of the work of ImpactPHL with our listeners. And so maybe, Cory, if you want to get us started, just maybe walk us through sort of what brought you to co-found ImpactPHL and what kind of the original vision and goals were when you did.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks again for having us. I was really at the table when some people started talking about the genesis of what became ImpactPHL, and the thinking was really around, as you may know, Philadelphia is the poorest big city in the country. We're also one of the wealthiest regions in the country. There's plenty of wealth in the area. It's been a disinvested city for multiple decades. We've got a lot of big problems around poverty, around educational outcomes, health outcomes, and, sort of that saying of if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you always got, right? And so the idea was, what can we do to move the needle and how? And so we had a lot of conversations in the first year or two with, high net worth people, family offices, foundations, and a lot of people in the financial sector. And one of the things that became clear was that the people in the financial sector, and I'm making a broad generalization here, weren't having conversations with their clients about how and where their money was invested. And so those conversations weren't being initiated. And I also kind of tend these days to talk to people that most of us were taught a two-pocket version of capitalism. I make money with my left hand through employment, investments, or running a business. I do good with my right through donating and volunteering. And often, as plenty of the listeners of this podcast know, the two are misaligned. And so we kind of tend to think about one pocket thinking. So the question became, how do we encourage people to be one pocket thinkers, to think beyond just their donations and their volunteering, to how do they leverage our financial horsepower? And so nowadays I talk about, if we could align the full financial horsepower of the Philadelphia region with what's good for the Philadelphia region, what would that world look like? And so that's kind of how we got started. And as we've had those conversations with those audiences, and identifying what gets in the way, first as an advocacy organization to the wealth itself. So if the front door to those conversations is the financial sector, but they're not initiating those conversations, we go to the back door to the people who own the wealth and have these conversations, which is surprisingly often where I never thought of it that way, is what I hear a lot. Didn't think about it that way. And then encourage them to go back to the front door to have those conversations. So now the financial people are listening to their clients, not, ImpactPHL. And then we also add local as a lens for your investments, right? You live here, your kids go to school here, you volunteer locally, you donate in your community. Everything about you is community driven, except for your money. We can come back to that later, but that's the other lens that we add, is how does Philly invest in Philly?
Yeah, no, excited to get more into that. And how about just sort of personally, are you a Philadelphia native? What sort of kind of prompted you to get involved with this as it came together?
I grew up in Scranton, which is a very disinvested place for, 100 years now. And so the way I grew up poor and seeing a lot of the challenges of our economy and how it works. So I think it just instinctively and natively kind of called to me. To me, I think a lot of this is self-evident, self-aware. maybe undoing some of the rules we've been taught about financial decision making, which were written by other people, and really asking people to think about it differently, what aligns with how you see the world and what you want. And I think that's basically how it came to me. Some of this just made sense.
Yeah, gotcha. Great. And Kafi, tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to Impact PHL and kind of where you see it going in the next few years.
Thank you. Thanks,
Mhm.
George, and thank you for having us here. And so my journey and my background is a little bit of a winding road. I started my career as a lawyer. I moved from there into community development banking and eventually became an investment banker focused on public finance. That path and that journey really gave me an understanding of the technical foundation in finance and in, our regulatory systems and the law, and also a deep understanding of how the systems work, financial, political, social, and how that all shapes opportunity in our region. So, to the question you also asked, Corey, I am a native Philadelphian. I grew up in one of the poorest districts in this city and just really have a real keen understanding and desire around economic development.
Mhm.
Excuse me. So I became CEO of Impact PHL last September. I can't believe it's almost been a year. I keep wanting to quantify it
Mhm.
in months. And and it's such an amazing organization. And I really see impact investing as an underutilized tool in that economic development space. And came into this just really wanting to understand and figure out how we can create that platform here. I get to build on all of the work that Corey and the staff have done over, I believe we're going into our 10th year next year, right? And just the amazing work and credibility and trust that the organization has established, and really figuring out how we can utilize Impact PHL as both a community and a platform. It's a space where we have investors, entrepreneurs, funders, and civic leaders, and we all come together around this shared belief of how capital can be a tool for regional transformation, a lot of what Corey was saying. And what we're also focusing on moving into the future is how we move that, how we scale that, how we move from individual transactions to system level change. I'm
Mhm.
really excited about an initiative that we're laying the groundwork for and building out that'll be cross collaborative. Our regional stakeholders come together and mobilize aligned capital for our region, and utilizing that capital, like I said, to go into not only economic development, but namely like wealth creation tools for our region and how we can have that inclusive economic development and inclusive growth.
Mhm. That's so great and it's exciting. I think with our network being sort of more national and, Corey, as you said, like investors don't always think local, and there's lots of ways to have impact, but having a network that really is so kind of focused on a city or a region, um, and looking at the ways that that investment capital can drive impact and economic development is really exciting. So excited to learn more about what that actually looks like. And tell us a little bit about, I guess just that model. Like, what is it about Philadelphia, Greater Philadelphia, that is maybe unique, that sort of allowed this network to emerge? And you see it as a model for other cities or metropolitan regions to kind of emulate? And are there any others that are similar out there that you know of?
So, Philadelphia has a long and underrecognized legacy of value aligned capital and community centered economic thinking. So, I'm sure you're familiar, we're founded by the Quakers, and they are some of the first to really align their values with their investment.
Yeah.
They avoided industries like tobacco, firearms based on their beliefs. And we really think that that early practice of social responsible investing is part of the DNA of this region.
Hmm.
Philadelphia is also the home of Dr. Leon Sullivan. If you're familiar, he pioneered one of the more powerful models of economic empowerment through community ownership. He brought together congregations and a lot of the Black residents of Philadelphia to invest, I believe it was like $18 a month, and they bought Progress Plaza, which is still thriving and under the ownership of the Leon Sullivan Trust. It was the first Black-owned shopping center in the country. He also developed the Sullivan Principles and helped shape global conversations around economic justice. More recently, we're the launch pad for major innovations like B Lab, the organization behind B Corp, came out of Philly, if you didn't know. The Reinvestment Fund, which is one of the most innovative and earliest CDFIs, was founded right here by three women, which I just found out I think is really cool. Um, we're also the home to Judy Wicks, who's a local legend, but also has some national acclaim. And she really helped spark the local economy and sustainable food movement. She had the restaurant White Dog, but also was one of the founders of the Sustainable Business Network, which did become a template for other cities. So our culture here is not just about innovation, but about value-based innovation and investing. And that's something we're really proud of. And I think, really one of the core reasons why Impact PHL was able to grow in the way that it did.
Yeah, that's very cool. Sorry, Cory, go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump in on that. I think that idea of investing in your own community, what I found over the last 9 years, is fairly self-evident. I think it's a latent self-evident, right? That the people don't know they can do it until you talk about it, right? Where is our money going? I say, Wall Street's done a very good job of building highways out of every community in America, and then we all sit around looking for where's the money for affordable housing to invest in our small businesses, Black and brown, women-led, et cetera. But it's our money, it's our capital. We'd like to think that Impact PHL is one of the leaders in this idea of place-based impact investing. And one of my favorite talking point nowadays, because again, we've been at this for 9 years, and some of this is a long-term change, right? It doesn't happen overnight, and as people have to build trust, we're talking about people's money. But we have 10 foundations here in the Philadelphia region that have changed financial consultants, financial advisors within the last 3 years. So in terms of like putting your finger on it, right? So that's, hundreds of millions of dollars that is shifting what is its purpose is. And all of them have also added local as a lens. And so again, I think that is important, but also what the financial industry is hearing, right? If you can't do this for your clients, they will leave you. And also, by the way, I know you don't do local investing now, place-based investing, but if you want my business and you want to manage my money, you need to help me figure that out. So I think that's the even more important. And I like to tell my friends in the tech sector, because my background's in the tech startup ecosystem, right? What we hear a lot is it's easier for me to get money from New York and Korea than it is from our local community. I think that's true for a lot of communities, but that means tens of millions of dollars, hopefully eventually hundreds of millions of dollars that will be actively seeking not just local investments, but local investments that make Philadelphia a better place. And that sends signals to the entrepreneurs and the business leaders as well, right? If you want the investment capital, then you also need to listen to what our priorities are in terms of impact and outcomes.
Yeah, it's a great point. And we think about that a lot with the asset owners, the endowments we work with, in terms of the advisors they choose or the managers they choose, because like you said, that sort of client demand is what will drive action. And so that's, exciting to see that they're actually making changes to go with groups that sort of have experience or expertise on these topics. So yeah, kind of as you all think about like the local impact, what are some of the main themes that you focus on in the community? I mean, imagine you sort of mentioned economic development and inclusive economics. I imagine addressing the wealth gap, but do you get into issues around like climate change or climate adaptation, any other sort of environmental issues? What's kind of the range of how people think about that?
A lot of what people are talking about now here is around economic mobility and understanding the intersection of what you just mentioned, the racial wealth gaps and economic development and climate resilience and sustainability. There was a study that came out recently from Raj Shetty on his opportunity atlas, where Philly came in 50 out of 50 on the economic mobility scale. And so as we're thinking about, what's happening there and why that's happening, really helping our region understand that system level, that there was a systemic, historically underinvested and disinvested practices that came into our region, and that the way that we move that forward is a system level thinking around how we grow the economy, and that it's not just a moral imperative, that it's an economic strategy. There's a lot of, I always love to reference the city report, which talks about if people of color had access to the same economic tools and financial products as their counterparts, we could have added $16 trillion to the US GDP over the last 20 years. And even if today we close those gaps, we can generate $5 trillion in growth over the next 5 years. So thinking also about, yes, it's economic development, yes, it's wealth creation, but it's also a real economic strategy for growing the country, and growing our GDP.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great point. I think it's just like such a fundamental misperception around a lot of these efforts to sort of address these historic and ongoing kind of structures that have kept certain groups out of economic opportunity, that it's, I think people just assume it's like a zero-sum game. If, someone else is getting more, I'm getting less. But I think, as you just referenced, there's lots of evidence and data that shows this is actually holding our whole economy back and hurting everybody.
And I'll just add that we are very focused on people, place, and planet. We highlight that theme through Total Impact Summit, and that there's a real intersection between all of those. We're looking at this inclusive growth regionally here currently, but our summit also really takes that theme and works through all of those pillars. I don't know, Cory, if you want to add anything there.
No, other than Total Impact Summit 2026 will be May 13th and 14th. So it seems like an opportune time to mention that and get it on people's radar screen.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk a little bit about that, just like the function of how the network works. You've got the big annual event. What are some of the other like activities day to day that you all do?
Kafi, do you want to take that? Or you want me to take that?
I'll start and then you can finish.
Sure.
This isn't our rolling. So one of the things when I came into this role that I heard in terms of feedback and saw was just the ability for ImpactPHL to build out community and do education. So we're doing more engagements throughout the year. We're building more community. And like I mentioned, really working on this regional cross-collaborative initiative of moving more capital aligned into economic development and place-based initiatives. We've done an amazing job kind of highlighting the summit that I think last year or this year we had about 450 people. We're expecting to have more in 2026. So just really continuing not only highlighting what's happening here and what can be done regionally, but also bringing in people nationally to show us and also show other people the innovations that are happening in this space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll add in to say, I think about our work as sort of a 4-step process with a 2-step call to action, right? Engage, challenge, inform, and empower. First of all, we have to go out and engage the wealth. Again, if we're sitting back and waiting for the financial sector to initiate these conversations, it'll be a while. Challenge this 2-pocket model, right? I always tell people the average person gives away 2 to 3%. That muscle's this big. A foundation is 5%. Over here is our muscle, right? That's our investments. What is that doing, right? And if that's creating the problems, and I think I'm again preaching to the choir here, but that engage and outreach function with ImpactPHL, if we're going to normalize this and get beyond the niche and get beyond the people who are listening to this podcast, we have to initiate the conversations, engage, challenge, inform, and empower. So when they leave a conversation with us, almost everyone's invested in the public market. So if they go to have a conversation with their financial advisor and say, hey, here are my values, my money isn't aligned, I want you to help me, and they move some money around, that's a win for us, right? They're being thoughtful. The financial sector is hearing, et cetera. And money is moving and it's being more thoughtful and intentional, but also adding local as the lens, right? And so that's the part where, again, I think it's a self-evident desire. It motivates people. Who doesn't like the idea of investing in their own community? It's often invisible. Again, the mainstream financial markets typically don't or can't help you with that. So sometimes they say, sometimes we're the steroid, sometimes we're the muscle. Right? If it already exists, the investor value tool from As You Sow, I use it every single day. I love that it gives a letter grade, right? You don't have to be a sophisticated investor and know what a PE ratio is. Everybody went to grade school, right? So you see F's in the issue you just told me you care so much about. It's pretty self-evident you have work to do. But the local stuff, it's no one's job to identify those opportunities. I call that the metal detection work, right? Where are the opportunities and what do they look like and what's the impact associated with them? And how do we make them visible to this growing network of people in the ImpactPHL that are tuned into our signal, right? To say, hey, you care about, recidivism, incarceration, your money gets in effing prisons. Do you know about the decarceration fund, wash cycle laundry, triple bottom brewing, first step staffing, all that are working to help employ people with employment challenges? And I think that's where people start to make the connections with there's stuff I'm not seeing and there's stuff that I'm getting ahead of myself here, but and answering questions you didn't ask. But I think a lot of the financial stuff is head only conversation. But when you can engage people about the issues they care about and they can connect the head and the heart, to motivate, it motivates them in ways that they hadn't really thought about before.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Let's talk a little bit about like some of those as you're helping people identify investment opportunities with that local lens. What does that look like in terms of asset class? Because, you mentioned public markets, public equities. It's kind of hard to think about doing that locally. So is it mostly private market? Is it people looking at, individual companies to invest in or local venture capital funds? Like what are the structures that people are looking at?
Yeah, well, I think part of it too is getting people to think about, listen, if your public money is invested in things that are creating negative outcomes for Philadelphia, right? Think about like a company not paying a living wage. They're creating poverty in Philadelphia. They're institutionalizing poverty, right? So I think it can be thinking about local with regard to that. But to your point, it's not quite as acute, right? The beautiful thing about local investing, because the first thing people often ask for is like, give me some examples. What's happening there? And I kind of break it down into three categories, right? Direct investments in social enterprises. That can be a tech startup that's solving a specific issue. It can be a local business that's hiring formerly incarcerated, formerly homeless people. So direct investments in social enterprises. And I've named a few of those, in terms of Wash Cycle Laundry and Triple Bottom Brewing, for example. Then you have, or trapezium math, sorry, which is a Black women-led PhD helping kids learn math by making it more fun, right? Investment opportunity. Then there's direct investments in real estate. So again, maybe people think tech startups are too, and I think the important part here is to meet them where they are, not be prescriptive or judgmental about things, right? Some people might see tech startups as too risky. That's not a fit. But real estate feels tangible. Maybe it's easier for them to understand, et cetera. So here in Philly, we've got Shift Capital, which is doing work in Kensington, which is sort of ground zero with the opioid epidemic on the East Coast, and they're literally rebuilding Kensington. And then we also have Women's Community Revitalization Project, which is a nonprofit. So sometimes I get the question, how do I invest in a nonprofit, right? I'm like, well, they borrow money too, right? And so they're borrowing money to build affordable housing for low-income families. I think that's one that a lot of people say, well, yeah, who doesn't agree with affordable housing for low-income families? And then the final category is funds, right? So some people don't have the time, expertise, or interest in making direct investments, which comes with due diligence and work. So funds become a vehicle to say, hey, great. And CDFIs, not all CDFIs are investable, but here in Philadelphia, we're fortunate to have two CDFIs that are investable, not only for accredited investors, but also for retail investors, as little as $1,000. That's a reinvestment fund, which Kafi mentioned, and Community First Fund.
And for those who don't know, CDFI is a community development financial institution that focuses on making loans to local businesses and enterprises.
Right. Kind of filling the gap of where banks don't, right? And every CDFI by definition has a mission. And then there's venture funds, right? But venture funds or managed funds that have a mission, right? So here in Philadelphia, I think I mentioned earlier the Decarceration Fund, which is investing in companies that are solving for mass incarceration, recidivism, and the pain and suffering caused by that. We also have Elevate Impact Capital, which has an ESOP conversion fund. So we've got a problem with the silver tsunami and business owners retiring and dissolving their businesses. Their theory is we can convert those to ESOPs into shared ownership and wealth creation. So, even just laying all that out to folks, like I did with you here, they see the plethora of opportunity, and that it's not just one or two here and there. And there's lots of different ways to invest in your community: debt, equity, startups, real estate, funds, et cetera.
And those funds you mentioned are based in Philly, and do they exclusively invest in companies in the area?
So our definition of what we put out there, and again, make it visible, right? And we're not, just to be clear, we're not managing money. We're not providing financial advice. Our role is advocacy and information, right? So it's literally invisible. Our job is to make it visible and show people what's out there and what's possible. And so these funds are anything we put out there. We want to make sure it's an investment, not a donation, number one, and that it has some kind of Philly component to it, right? So if it's sustainable farming in Tibet, that's great. But ImpactPHL isn't going to put it out there. So if it's headquartered here, that checks the box for us. If it's not headquartered here, First Step Staffing is actually headquartered in Atlanta, but they were brought to Philadelphia by impact investors, and now they paid out over $130 million in W-2 wages to formerly incarcerated and formerly homeless. So that checks the box. So as long as there's an impact component, that there's some impact in Philadelphia, and it's an investment, that's what we consider to be sort of meeting our criteria.
So I'll just add one part to that, because we have a really great platform called Opt Impact, where accredited investors are able to go in and take a look at these opportunities, these investable opportunities. They're also able to share due diligence on that platform. As Cory stated, these are investable opportunities for this region, for the greater Philadelphia region, but accredited investors from anywhere can come in, look at our platform, and invest in the businesses and the opportunities that he highlighted.
Fantastic.
And the other thing I'll add, which I just think is a great model when you talk about different asset classes, and Cory really touched on, place-based direct placements. There's a model out in New York City where their New York City workers' pension plan through their comptroller's office invest in what they call economically targeted investment. It's a really great program on how institutional investors can deploy capital into communities. So their pension plan, the New York City workers' pension plan, has invested over $4.2 billion since the 1980s into affordable housing, into businesses that are owned by people who were just historically underinvested, into job creation in some of these underinvested neighborhoods. I just really think it shows another great example of how a fiduciary responsibility and social impact are not in conflict, that you can get both. You can get returns and you can also invest in your region in large scale projects.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, it's something we've talked a bit about in our network with college and university endowments about how they can, think of themselves as anchor institutions and think about how their investments impact the community. And it does require a little bit of a change in thinking in some ways, and maybe going outside like the normal pathways and vehicles that they're used to. But I think there's a ton of exciting opportunity there. And Cory, we talked a little bit about, I think you said there hasn't been much engagement from them in the Philadelphia region, but I think that would be exciting to explore and bring in some more of those institutional investors because, am I right? Most of the folks in your community are families, high net worth individuals, those types of investors.
And foundations.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I'd love to talk a little bit. Cory, you've talked about kind of preaching to the choir here, but we do have folks, listening that are really new to a lot of these concepts. And we talk a lot about externalities and just how some of the activities that businesses take, they externalize those costs. And would love to hear your thoughts, both of your thoughts on how, traditional standard investment that's not kind of intentional about these issues can really impact communities, and how impact investors can help not only address those externalities, but kind of drive positive impact in communities.
Go ahead. I think you mentioned it a little bit around how traditional business activities, whether it's environmental, social, or economic, can often show up as these hidden costs. So we've got like pollution. I think Cory talked a little bit about, underpaid labor, gentrification, or really racial segregation and displacement, and how these extractive development practices are examples of how when you have profits that are privatized and the costs are socialized. So they definitely disproportionately affect low income, historically marginalized communities. They create long-term harm. And this is really, to your point, where impact investors have a critical role to play in changing the dynamic. They can actively identify and account for their externalities in their due diligence process. They can also avoid profiting from them, right? As Cory talked about, looking at people's portfolios and not being invested in private prisons, if that's not one of your core values, which it shouldn't be. My opinion only. This Kafi's opinion, not impact. So
That one seems pretty clear. Hopefully you can agree on that.
But how do you allocate capital to businesses and projects that are designed to generate positive externalities like living wage, like climate resilience and affordable housing? And, we're starting to see these examples. Cory talked a little bit about, employee ownership. We're also seeing models of community ownership. So Kensington Corridor Trust is a really dynamic organization here who this organization is putting commercial properties into a community ownership trust. And these properties also have apartments on the top. The apartments will be long-term, affordable, deeply subsidized by the rents from the community, by the rents from the commercial property, sorry. So they are creating a model that will be self-sustaining, that will maintain and keep deeply affordable units. So and they're being invested in by, national foundations that are interested in this particular model and how you grow. So I think there's definitely a way that we can utilize impact investing, not as doing not just as doing less harm, but also actively repairing what traditional markets often overlook and what they've damaged. And really, more so, as we were talking earlier, helping investors adopt a systems level lens to help shape the role of capital from extraction to regeneration and create the conditions for long term inclusive growth. I think there's a lot of really positive things. I believe it's the Rockefeller Foundation and their philanthropy advisors are moving towards system level thinking. They've put out a guide on how investors can invest with system level lens, and that all of those are just really exciting innovations happening in this space.
Yeah, and if I may jump in there, George, I don't know if I heard you say this, Kafi, but I think with Kensington Corridor Trust, an important thing for people to understand is they're turning over control of the assets to the people in the community. So the community is making decisions about,
Absolutely.
hey, we don't need another, vape store, or we want a laundromat, or we want a coffee shop, or we need this. And, that is, again, who controls the assets, regardless of whose capital it is. But if I may tack on to some of what Kafi was saying there, um, at Total Impact Summit for the last 3 or 4, we've had sort of a State of the Union at the beginning of day one. Where are we? What's going on? What do we need to be talking about? And a yearly update. We've had Fran Siegel there from the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance a few times. This year on the beginning of day 2, we did a session, and if I get my way, we'll continue to do it because I think it's really interesting. The way we frame the conversation is, if we were to start over, how would we structure our financial system and our investing? Because I think the idea that your capital is going behind this black curtain and doing stuff that you don't know it's doing and don't want it to be doing is nonsensical, right? We would engineer a system that we had more input, more thoughtfulness, and more control. And then recognizing, so I think, again, just making the point to people that this probably isn't the system we would have designed, right, in the first place. And then recognizing that we're not starting from scratch. How do we get from here to there? And I think that's a really interesting conversation when people can have their aha moment, get past the on-ramp to this to say, okay, that makes sense, start to normalize it. Then it's, okay, how do we get from here to there to engineer things, re-engineer a financial system that actually works for people, planet, and society?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exciting. And again, I think the scale of the kind of metropolitan region or area is a really interesting one to be working at for that. And it does level up, to your point, Kafi, to the system level kind of work, which is a lot of what we've been doing in our network, as well as recognizing these systemic risks, kind of go beyond any one individual investor's portfolio. And there's a need to really address them across the board. And, part of what we've been talking about around that is policy. There's like a need for changes in policy to actually internalize some of these externalized costs that we've been talking about and level the playing field around them. But obviously right now we're facing a lot of kind of like political headwinds in the other direction, pushing back on impact and ESG investing. I'm just curious if you've seen that show up much in the conversations locally, or folks just kind of pushing on, and what do you make of all that?
I think one of the most exciting things that we saw at Total Impact Summit 25 was people really talking about the need to build out new systems, that the old systems might not have worked for us properly anyway, to some of what Cory spoke to, right? If we could just design the systems that worked, what would it look like? The old systems are being dismantled in a very disruptive way. We would never want it done in this way, but it does also give the opportunity to think about what are the new systems, what are the new ways. There was a lot of energy at our last summit, and people were just really excited about thinking about these new systems, about working together. There was a lot of collaboration happening in the room, a lot of cross conversations, not only on the panels, but in the audience as well. And people were really asking themselves, to Cory's point, what would it look like to build a financial system that actually works for everyone? And there was just a lot of energy around moving that forward. Where people are coming in with more courage, more transparency, and more collaboration, and really leaning into their values. They may not be as loud about it, but we're still hearing that the people that are interested in the sustainable investment, that are interested in this place-based investing, are still moving forward. And that's the most exciting thing to me, that people are not just hunkering in a corner, that people are really excited to move forward.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point. I made me think about it a lot. Just the evidence that the system is not working, and this disruption, I think, is a unfortunate response, but it does open the way for new pathways, as you said, and that's, I think, in some ways inevitable. I think a lot of the sustainability work that we've been doing in the field for a long time is to try to create as smooth an evolution to a new system as possible. And maybe that wasn't happening. So we're getting a harsh break and these types of disruptions. But yeah, it's great that there are communities like yours looking, kind of innovating at how to rebuild new systems that can better serve everybody. I guess along those lines, what would you have as a call to action for folks, whether it's, investors, people with wealth in other parts of the country, or institutional investors, or anyone in this space?
I'll just jump in and say to really start questioning what it means to be a fiduciary. If you're an institutional investor and you're, say, for example, you represent a teacher's pension plan, are you being a good fiduciary if you're investing in housing that's displacing actual teachers in their community? Right? The question should be no, and that should be embedded into the investor policy. How are we investing in the communities where our people work? And how are we serving them best? So I'd really push us to think differently about how we're acting in the long-term best interest of all of our beneficiaries, not just in how they're growing revenue and growing capital, but how they're growing their regions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just jump in to say I think um, this isn't necessarily easy, but anybody who's been through the process and really looked in the mirror, right? Because I think, again, kind of going back to that muscle metaphor, the biggest muscle we all have is our economy. And if that problem, if that muscle is creating the problem that we're trying to fix with 2 to 5% of our give back, our nonprofits and our philanthropic dollars are fighting a losing battle. And, I think people can recognize that. They might look away, but at the end of the day, if you're serious about actually solving these issues, we all have to collectively look at that. And it's not going to be easy. Clara Miller was on stage from the Heron Foundation a couple years ago, and she said, Wall Street, again, has done a very good job building highways. We have to build the plumbing in community. And that's not easy. I always say, if there's a highway built to Wall Street, we got to go off-road through the mud on an ATV. It's not as easy, but we have to do that work because that's the road, that's the path. And it's, again, just to be clear, we're not anti-capitalism, we're not anti-Wall Street, it's not anti-anything. It's really, you're either intentional or you're not. And if you're not intentional, then I'd say you're not really serious about fixing whatever issue you're talking about, whatever issue bothers you, whatever issue you're donating to. You really have to look in the mirror if you're not interested in looking at the muscle you have. And I'd say, well, outside of your vote, the biggest muscle you have is your capital. And I think, generally speaking, broadly speaking, most people are letting that tool on the tool bench untouched. And so that's really, I think, our main call to action.
Yeah, it's a great one. And you got to sort of follow the money, and that's where so much leverage is. And Kafi, I love your point. I mean, we talk a lot about the sort of expanded notion of fiduciary duty, and it's something that evolves, right? And we're facing new unprecedented risks and new challenges around social and environmental sustainability in the 21st century. And I think, like you said, whether it's pensions or endowments or just individuals looking at their own retirement long term, what does it matter if the world's falling apart around you? So that's got to be central. And also, the returns aren't going to be there long term if we see that kind of breakdown socially and environmentally. So nice. Well, this has been so great. I want to do a couple of our kind of rapid fire questions as we move towards wrapping up here. So tell us, what's the most fun part about all of your work with ImpactPHL?
I can just start and say the people. Not only the people internally at ImpactPHL, but the people of the community, nationally, internationally, regionally, that everybody is really, to Cory's point, like eager and wants to understand and wants to figure out how to help. We all come from different backgrounds and places, in our journey, but just really that deep commitment to trying to figure this out, and just being able to work with like wonderful people that are on that journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. The people are amazing. I love working in a space where people don't have ego and are collaborative and thoughtful on things. But I'll also add, my favorite part of the work is working with good people and helping to help them have that aha moment, right? When you can see the light bulb going on, because again, we're engaging people that haven't quite joined this community yet. And as they see the problems and the opportunities, I've never been a teacher, but I imagine that when you help a kid learn something and you can see it start to click, and then you see them later, sometimes it takes years, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, but now they're moving, they're acting, and they're excited about it. That's really rewarding.
Yeah, that's exactly what we see in our network too, and it is exciting. And Kafi, to your point, it's funny that the whole impact sustainable investing field, just so many great people. And people always joke it's the only like finance conferences you go to where everyone's hugging and laughing, and it is a great community. I'm sure it's the same with the work you're doing there. All right, how about one like book, podcast, resource that you would recommend to people who are interested in learning more about all this?
Again, I'm going to preach about systems level. And really, I think The Color of Law is just a great book to really show like systemically what's happened. Also, that's the city study that I referenced. It's just a really compelling roadmap as to how we got here and ways we can move forward.
Awesome. Cory?
Oh, I took it as I could name one of each. So if we got just go fast. There's a podcast called Capitalism by Seen on Radio that kind of goes back to feudalism and the breakdown and the progression of capitalism. I think that's really interesting. Book I recently read is World Eaters, how venture capital is cannibalizing our economy. And then maybe if for an article, I'll mention there's an article out there about what would fiduciary duty to community look like, which I think is really interesting. To kind of to Kafi's earlier point about how do we flip what fiduciary responsibility means. So I think that's maybe to quote Arsenio Hall, things that make you go,
Nice. Those are all great. And I think mostly new to me. So I'll check them out. Maybe we'll get links from you to put in the show notes too, so people can find them easily. And how about when you're not working on all this and building this community, what do we find you doing when you're not at work?
I'm a lacrosse mom, which I think is like its own full-time job. So I'm on the sideline of a field somewhere between Rhode Island and Baltimore most weekends. Also, I love the fact when I have time to read, to walk, and any beach, anywhere, anytime.
Nice. Yeah, the lacrosse thing has gotten out of control. It's like hockey, all these youth sports. People are traveling all over the place. It's wild. Is it boys or girls or both?
Boys, just one
Yep.
one boy, one full-time job.
Yeah,
Sports mom.
nice. Yeah, I've been coaching my daughter's lacrosse team, and it's luckily just the local town team, so it's been a little more.
Keep it that way as long as possible.
Yeah, we'll see. Cory, how about you?
Probably playing basketball, walking my dog on the streets of Philly, or some DIY projects on my house or my car or something like that.
Nice. Awesome. Well, we're going to wrap up with our final 2 questions we ask all of our guests. And the first is, what is your vision for the future of finance? You've talked quite a bit about it actually already, but maybe if you could just kind of sum up, what do you think the financial system really needs to look like if we're successful with all these efforts?
Just stay to one of the points you made. I love the philosophy or the investment thesis of Japan's government pension investment plan. And they're one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. And they really say that we plan on being around, like our fund being around for the next 100 years. We're going to invest in a way that the earth, the world, and civilizations are around for the next 100 years. And I just really think that's a great lens to look at and really think about how for the future of finance, we can have one where capital is designed to serve people, communities, and the planet first, not the other way around. And it's a system where it's no longer extractive and transactional, but also regenerative, relational, and rooted in shared prosperity. And one, as we mentioned a lot, that really thinks about ownership, who's at the table, and who's part of the equity of what we're investing in.
Well said. Cory, how about you?
I'll double down on what Kafi said, and I'll come back to Total Impact Summit, which again we'll be doing May 13th, 14th next year here in Philadelphia. And next year is the semi-quincentennial of our country, right? We'll have been around for 250 years. We pioneered this version of capitalism, and we're going to do sort of a look back and a look forward on capitalism in light of our anniversary as a country, and kind of positioning the people who make it in the room as the founding mothers and fathers of the next 250 years, right? What kind of capitalism do we want to re-engineer to do what Kafi said, right? And so I think this is a moment in time where we, not only with the problems that we're facing, but also in light of our anniversary, to say we are the stewards of the next 250 years. And how do we do that?
Fantastic. I love it. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm hoping to be down with you all for that. And then, we're trying to reach as many young people, college students, people at the institutions that are in our network who might be interested in going into this sector or this type of work. What kind of advice would you give them to do that?
And really to continue to learn as learn the tools, master the fundamentals, and really but use that and push us to think differently. I love, young people have come into information in a way that we haven't. My favorite, I'll tell a real quick story about my son. He might have been like 4 or 5. We're looking at the moon. He says, "Mom, how do we get to the moon?" I say, "We can't." He says, "Well, let's just build a rocket. It's got to be something on YouTube." And I just really think young people have that orientation that they can build anything, but learn the fundamentals, learn the tools, and then go out and build and push us. And don't wait. Like, we need you. Come into the room and push our thinking and push the way that we do things.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. And I think it's just so often lost in addressing these problems and framing them as problems is like they're, it's kind of cliche, but they're all opportunities. There's so much potential for innovation and excitement in creating these new systems. So I think that's great. Cory, how about you? Any other thoughts?
No, I was just, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm just thinking about kids, that why, but why, right? So I'm just sitting here visualizing high school and college kids, talking, hey, talk to people about their money, because what you're going to find is a lot of them don't know, which is telling by itself. And then if you're saying, hey, why are you investing that way? I think that could lead to some interesting conversations, right? Because you're either going to learn that people aren't thoughtful, aren't intentional, don't know where their money's invested, or they are being thoughtful and intentional, which I think is a different, interesting conversation. And I think asking people about their money, because I do it every day now, right? What are you doing? Do you know? Do you even know? Right? Most people don't, which leads to these conversations. And I think that could be an interesting exercise by itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic. Well, this has been so great, and thank you both for all the work you're doing. I'm excited to keep working with you all more, and hopefully see you in Philly next May, if not before. But really appreciate you taking the time and telling us a little bit about ImpactPHL's work.
Thanks for the
Thank you
opportunity.
so much.
Of
Yep,
course.
thank you.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in for the Future of Finance podcast. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And please take a moment to rate, review, or share the show. All of this really helps us to reach more people like you who care about creating a thriving and sustainable future. And it's a really easy way to have a big impact. So please do follow. A quick disclaimer, the content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investments and strategies discussed may not be suitable for all listeners. Please consult a financial, legal, tax, or accounting professional before making any investment decisions. References to managers and funds are for informational purposes only and should not be considered endorsements or investment solicitations. This podcast does not monitor fund performance or guarantee the accuracy of third-party materials or statements. This has been an episode of the Future of Finance podcast, exploring how finance can shape a vibrant and sustainable future. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.